Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. We're taking a look at the final prices from James Julia's Spring 2018 firearms auction. As always, we had a bunch of machine guns, and we'll start with those. The Valmet M71 is essentially a commercial AK. These were all made for export and civilian sales, and so they don't really bring the money that a military, say a veteran, bring back Vietnam War AK does. That's why this is a little below most AK machine gun values. On the other hand, the Grease Gun is really quite the rare piece to find. Despite originally costing the US government next to nothing, very few of them have gotten out onto the civilian market. So when you do find them, especially completely original ones like this, they tend to bring quite a lot of money, 34, 35 grand in this case. Stoners, of course, also bring a lot of money because, well, in this case, there aren't a whole lot of them on the market, but there were also very few of them originally built. There are some varieties within the Stoners that are out there. There are some original Cadillac Gauge. This one was a Knight's Armament receiver, which brings a little less, but that Bren gun configuration is rare and thus brings a little more. The Hyde gun, there are very few of these things out there. This really is an experimental American machine gun. You could in some ways say it's a predecessor to the Grease Gun because they in fact had the same designer. Really cool gun, brought a little less than was estimated, but I think that's because the estimate was a little bit high in the first place. This Sten is not an original British military suppressed Sten. It is instead a commercial reproduction made by a guy on a transferrable Sten gun, so still pretty darn cool, but you can see that's why the price is commensurate with a manufactured Sten, not an original military one. On the other hand, back again, the R75A here is a very rare type of, or model of, Colt commercial, transferable, CNR eligible. This thing really has everything going for it. The very last Colt commercial manufactured BAR. Really cool gun. The Beretta M38 brought a price that's kind of low for World War II subguns, perhaps. But I think these are going to go up. These are really fantastic shooting guns that are widely underappreciated. Arguably one of the best submachine guns of World War II. Now, if you're looking for shooters, they also had this thing. This is a transferable BAR that had been rebuilt into basically an ideal from-the-shoulder shooting configuration, chambered for 7mm Mauser. Brought $16,000, which is largely because it is a transferable BAR receiver. So despite the fact that as in its current state, it has really no collectible value, it could always be turned back into a World War I or World War II pattern BAR. And so that's why that thing tends to bring more money than you might expect from a completely bastardized gun. The Steyr-Solothurn here is the exact opposite. This is a magnificent original condition, and I think Japanese used, although I can't prove that. Another really excellent, very high-quality pre-World War II submachine gun, and you can see it brought a couple $1,000s more than the Beretta. This is another one that doesn't really have the name recognition, but they're great guns. Now, recoilless rifle here didn't bring a whole lot. It was a destroyed torch-cut receiver that was re-welded together, and destructive devices like this don't have the transferable sort of status that machine guns do. You can still register new destructive devices, and that keeps the prices on them down a bit. Now we're going to transfer over to some of the sporting guns out of the machine gun and NFA stuff, and dang, this is a Lorenzoni pattern rifle that was in the collection of King Louis XV of France. Certainly not his only gun, one in a substantially larger collection, but brought a significant amount of money, $182,000. It was, in every way, a magnificent firearm. Had a little bit of restoration to it after having been brought back to the U.S. After World War II. I don't know who got it. I hope they are very happy with it. It was a really cool gun to get to take a look at. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video on that one. Now looking at a few lower-end sporting guns, we had this one. It was a parallel bore side-by-side shotgun. So just a little bit of an interesting mechanical quirk to it. Still, however, a very fine sporting shotgun, and you see that in the price. You know, $6,300. It may not be 200 grand, but it's certainly nothing to scoff at. The volley gun, the Nock Volley Gun, $29,000. There were a few issues with this. I heard from some commenters after the video came out that there was a little bit of doubt about the stock, for example, whether it was original to the gun. I will leave that up to the decision of the bidders. The Lancaster here, again, you know, high-end sporting shotguns really are a market all of their own. And I'll admit I'm not really very deeply involved in that market, and so sometimes, while I know intellectually these guns are rare, prices like $25,000 for a sporting shotgun come to me as a bit of a surprise when, you know, you could get a really nice machine gun for that kind of price. Same thing here with a first pattern Winchester 1895. You know, $17,000, that's a lot of money for a lever action rifle. But of course, that's what you see with historical firearms. There are different groups of people interested in different types of firearms, and everyone has their specialty. To me, though, compared to some of the other the sporting guns, this Sharps would have been one of my choices. I really like the amount of history that was in it, and just the story that it kind of tells simply from existing. That was a really cool gun, rebuilt by a Wyoming gunsmith, and yeah, I like that one. This thing, the copy, the Norton DP75 with a titanium barrel, and then the 50% scale, immaculately magnificent copy of it, went for like 3 times what the estimate was, which is pretty unusual. Usually Julia's pretty spot on with her estimates, so don't know exactly what happened with this, but hopefully the winner appreciates it. A little bit of milsurp here for us. Some of the early British Enfields are really tricky to find in their original configuration because the vast majority of them got updated many times over their lifespan. So an original unmolested Mark I Star, you know, that brings a significant amount of money, like $4,000. And we see the same thing with original snipers of almost all patterns. Lebel snipers in particular are very scarce. Now this one isn't an original matching scope and rifle because, as I pointed out in the video, the rifle was in France after the 1930s. The scope was a World War I bringback, but still very difficult to find in any sort of configuration. Everyone wanted to see a punt gun, and so this is the first. I'm sure there will be others that we'll take a look at later, but this was the portable punt gun, or duck annihilating boat cannon, you might say. $5,400, $5,500, you know, these things are rare to find. They weren't sold in large numbers to begin with, of course. And pretty similar story behind the Porter turret rifle. We'll be looking at eventually all 3 patterns of these. They weren't, again, not big sellers, you know, because they were kind of dubious guns to begin with. A lot of safety concerns about those guns, so... Confederate guns, which we'll end with here. We've got a couple of these guys. They always bring big money because very few, you know, not many of them were made relative to everything else in the Civil War. They tended to be very used hard after the war as simply working firearms, and so very few survive today, and people want relics of the Civil War. So $20,000 for the Robinson Sharps copy. We have a Cook & Brother infantry rifle at $28,000, almost $29,000. Seems like a lot of money for a single-shot percussion muzzleloader, but of course that is what happens with collectible firearms. You're looking at the history and the stories and not just the metal itself. And I think there's no better example of that than the Cook & Brother Carbine, which sold for $39,000. If you watched the video on this, you'll remember, I hope, that the guy who was consigning it here originally, well, the provenance on this this carbine went back to a guy who traded it as a kid for an ice cream cone. So I figured I'd throw in there the fact that its sale price represents approximately 9,800 double scoop ice cream cones today. So if that was your investment medium, you would have done extremely well with that Cook & Brother carbine. Now, if you had that money in the stock market for, close to 100 years, I don't know. Maybe a different story there. And of course, 100 years from when the guy traded the ice cream cone, not from the Civil War itself. Anyway, this was the last James Julia auction that was going to be held. They have merged with a company called Morphy's Auction House. We will be doing video through the new Morphy's company as well. And I will see you guys when we have the first one of their auctions. Thanks for watching.